Tell me the truth before you go, Clara, Lorenzo demanded, leaning against the wood with dark, unreadable eyes. The heavy oak door had just slammed shut, echoing like a gunshot through the silent penthouse before the deadbolt clicked, a sharp, metallic sound that made her blood freeze. Clara Hughes stood frozen in the center of the sprawling, dimly lit office overlooking the Chicago skyline. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, blurring the amber streetlights of the Gold Coast into streaks of molten gold. Her heart was hammering a frantic, violent rhythm against her ribs. She tightened her grip on her leather briefcase, her knuckles turning white. "Lorenzo," she said, her voice remarkably steady despite the tremor in her hands. "It's past midnight. The quarterly audits for Bianchi Logistics are finalized. I need to go home." Lorenzo Bianchi, the undisputed head of the Chicago syndicate, didn't move from his position in front of the door. He was a terrifyingly still man. In his bespoke charcoal Brioni suit, he looked less like a mob boss and more like a ruthless Wall Street predator. But the gun holstered beneath his jacket and the jagged, fading scar along his jawline told a different story. He tilted his head, his dark, obsidian eyes sweeping over her slowly. He took his time, as he always did, looking at her. Clara was a big woman, fat, soft, and unapologetically taking up space in a world that usually demanded women shrink themselves. She had curves that were lush and heavy, a thick waist, and generous, rounded hips. Most men in Lorenzo's cutthroat, hyper-masculine world liked their women small, fragile, and easily discarded. But not Lorenzo. From the day Clara was brought in as a forensic accountant to clean up his front company's messy ledgers, he had looked at her like a starving man staring at a feast. I didn't just see her. He devoured her with his gaze. Right now, that gaze felt less like admiration and more like a crosshair. "You're in a rush, Clara," Lorenzo murmured, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that vibrated straight down her spine. "You never rush. You're meticulous. You check the numbers 3 times before you even hand me a folder. But tonight, you dropped that ledger on my desk like it was on fire." "I'm tired," Clara lied, adjusting the collar of her emerald green silk trench coat. The fabric clung to her full breasts and the soft curve of her stomach. She shifted her weight, feeling the familiar, heavy ache in her calves from wearing heels all day. "I've been staring at spreadsheets for 14 hours. Lorenzo pushed off the door. He walked toward her with the slow, deliberate grace of a panther, the scent of his expensive cologne, spicy bergamot mixed with the smoky peat of Macallan Scotch, enveloped her as he closed the distance. "Tired," he repeated, stopping barely an inch away from her. He was tall enough that Clara had to tilt her chin up to meet his eyes. "Is that why you missed the discrepancy in the Cayman's account? Or was it intentional?" The breath hitched in Clara's throat. She maintained eye contact, though every instinct screamed at her to look away. "There is no discrepancy. I balanced the accounts." $3.2 million, Clara," Lorenzo whispered softly, raising a large, calloused hand. He didn't reach for her throat. Instead, he gently, almost reverently, brushed a stray curl of dark auburn hair behind her ear. His knuckles grazed her plump, flushed cheek. $3.2 million evaporated from the K1 distributions of our real estate holdings, vanished into a shell corporation registered under the name Archangel LLC. Clara swallowed hard. He knew. Of course he knew. You didn't get to be Lorenzo Bianchi by letting millions slip through your fingers unnoticed. "I can explain," she said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. I hope to God you can, Lorenzo replied, his thumb now tracing the soft line of her jaw. There was a dangerous, possessive edge to his touch. Because normally when someone steals from me, they don't get to explain. My men take them to a warehouse off the south side. They break their kneecaps with a crowbar, and then they disappear into Lake Michigan. He stepped even closer, his chest brushing against hers. The physical contact sent a jolt of electricity through her heavy frame. But you... I locked the door, Clara, because I don't want my men to touch you. I don't want anyone to touch you. Tell me the truth before you go. Why did you steal from me? Clara looked into those merciless eyes and realized there was no exit. The briefcase slipped from her fingers, hitting the Persian rug with a dull thud. She wasn't just fighting for her job anymore. She was fighting for her life. I didn't steal it for myself, Clara said, her voice gaining strength, echoing in the cavernous office. Lorenzo let out a dark, humorless chuckle. They all say that, Mia Bella. They say it was for a sick mother, a gambling debt, a mistake. But the money always ends up buying a villa in Tuscany or a yacht in Monaco. Do I look like a woman who wants a yacht? Clara snapped, the anger finally burning through her terror. She shoved his hand away from her face. It was a risky move, suicidal even, but she was done cowering. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment in Logan Square. I drive a 6-year-old Honda. Look at the ledgers again, Lorenzo. Look at the routing numbers. Lorenzo's eyes narrowed. He was taken aback by her defiance. No one yelled at Lorenzo Bianchi. Men twice her size wept and begged on their knees in this very room. But Clara stood her ground, her heavy, imposing frame radiating a fierce, untouchable dignity. Walk me through it, then, he demanded, crossing his arms over his broad chest. Enlighten me. I didn't take the money. I diverted it, Clara said, pacing away from him. She needed space to breathe. 3 weeks ago, I was auditing the subsidiary accounts for the port operations, the ones managed by Victor Romano. At the mention of his underboss's name, Lorenzo's expression hardened into granite. Victor is blood. He's my second. Victor is a rat, Clara fired back, turning on her heel to face him. I noticed a pattern of micro-transactions. Small amounts, 20 grand here, 50 grand there, being siphoned off the shipping manifests. It was sloppy, amateur hour. But when I traced the dummy accounts, they weren't going into a retirement fund. They were being funneled into a private equity holding company linked to the Genovese family in New York. Lorenzo went deadly still. The silence in the room became suffocating, broken only by the rhythmic drumming of the rain against the glass. You're accusing my underboss of conspiring with New York. Lorenzo's voice was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of an executioner's blade. I'm not accusing him. I'm proving it, Clara said, her chest heaving. I dug deeper. Victor wasn't just stealing. He was building a war chest. He hired a private mercenary group out of Eastern Europe. I found the invoice, Lorenzo. It was disguised as security consulting for the new warehouse in Cicero, but the contract had an assassination clause. She walked back toward him, her fear replaced by a desperate, protective fury. She reached into the cleavage of her dress, right between her heavy breasts, and pulled out a small, encrypted titanium flash drive. It was warm from her body heat. She held it out to him. He put a hit on you, Lorenzo, Clara whispered, her voice cracking slightly. The hit was scheduled for tomorrow night, at the charity gala at the Drake Hotel. They needed a massive payout to finalize the contract. $3.2 million. Lorenzo looked at the flash drive in her trembling hand, then up at her face. And the Archangel Shell Company? I created it, Clara confessed. I hacked into the internal routing system and intercepted the wire transfer before it could reach Victor's mercenaries. I locked the money in an offshore trust that only I have the encryption key for. I starved his war chest. The mercenaries won't move without their upfront payment. Lorenzo slowly took the flash drive from her hand. His fingers brushed against hers, lingering. The cold, calculating mob boss was gone, replaced by a man struck with a profound, earth-shattering realization. You embezzled from the mob, Lorenzo said slowly, piecing it together. To save my life? If I had come to you without proof, you wouldn't have believed me, Clara said, a bitter smile touching her lips. Victor is your cousin. I'm just the fat accountant who crunches your numbers. I had to secure the money first, to buy myself time to compile the paper trail. It's all on that drive. The wire intercepts, the Genovese emails, the hit contract, everything. Lorenzo stared at her. The air between them shifted, growing heavy, charged, and intensely suffocating. He realized the colossal risk she had taken. If Victor had caught her looking into those accounts, she would have been tortured and killed. If the mercenaries had found out she froze their payment, they would have hunted her down. She had placed herself squarely in the crosshairs of a mafia war, all to protect him. I took a step toward her, then another, until she was backed up against the heavy mahogany of his desk. You risked your life, Lorenzo said, his voice dropping an octave, raspy and dark. You stole from me. You broke every rule in the syndicate, and you painted a target on your own back, for me. Clara swallowed, her back pressing into the edge of the desk. You pay me well, Lorenzo. It was fiduciary duty. Don't lie to me, Clara, he growled softly, placing his hands on the edge of the desk, caging her in. He leaned down, his face inches from hers. His gaze dropped to her mouth, then down to the soft, deep curve of her cleavage where the flash drive had been hidden, and finally back up to her terrified eyes. Fiduciary duty doesn't make a woman risk a bullet to the head. Why did you do it? Clara couldn't speak. She couldn't tell him the real truth. That over the last 2 years of late-night meetings, of watching him command a room, of feeling the dark, protective weight of his gaze on her lush body, she had fallen hopelessly, morbidly in love with a monster. When she didn't answer, Lorenzo reached out and gripped her thick waist. His large hands spanned the soft curve of her hips, pulling her flush against his hard, muscular body. Clara gasped at the sudden contact, her hands instinctively flying to his broad shoulders. You think you're just the accountant, Lorenzo murmured, his breath hot against her ear, sending shivers down her neck. You think I look at you and just see a calculator. He pressed his face into her neck, inhaling her scent. Vanilla and rain. I have watched you every single day, Clara. I've watched how you command my boardroom. I've watched the way this beautiful, thick body moves when you walk away from me. I've wanted to lock this door and ruin you on this desk for over a year. Clara let out a choked breath, her knees going weak. Lorenzo. Victor will die tonight, Lorenzo said, his tone suddenly shifting back to the chilling detachment of a mafia boss, though his hands remained firmly anchored on her hips. I will handle him. But you... He pulled back just enough to look her in the eyes, A dark, possessive fire burned in his gaze. "You are never leaving this building." "You locked the door," Clara whispered, her heart pounding frantically against her chest. "I did," Lorenzo agreed, his thumb stroking the soft skin of her stomach through her silk shirt. "And I'm not going to unlock it. You just proved you're the only person in this godforsaken city I can trust. Which means you belong to me now, Clara. Entirely." Lorenzo didn't kiss her. Not yet. He simply stood there, his large hands anchoring her heavy, trembling body to the edge of the mahogany desk. The raw, primal heat radiating from him was a stark contrast to the icy terror that had gripped Clara just moments before. I was claiming her, marking her as his in a way that required no physical intimacy, only the sheer, unbreakable force of his will. Slowly, Lorenzo stepped back. The sudden loss of his body heat left Clara shivering. He pulled a sleek, encrypted satellite phone from his breast pocket and dialed a single number. "Dante," Lorenzo said, his voice stripped of the husky warmth it had held a moment prior. He was pure, unadulterated Chicago syndicate now. "Victor Romano. He's at the Palmer House, room 412. He's packing his bags. Do not let him reach O'Hare. Make it look like a cartel dispute, then dump the pieces in the Calumet River." Clara flinched, her hands gripping the edge of the desk. She had always known what Lorenzo was. She had seen the aftermath of his violence in the ledgers, hush money paid to widows, cleanup crews disguised as industrial waste management. But hearing an execution ordered with the casual tone of someone ordering coffee shattered the last illusion of her safety. Lorenzo hung up and turned his dark, piercing gaze back to her. "It's done. The hit on me is cancelled. But we have a bigger problem, Clara." "A bigger problem?" she stammered, smoothing down her emerald silk coat over her full hips, desperately trying to regain her professional composure. "Victor is dead. The money is locked in the Archangel Trust. The Genovese family won't move without it." "Victor was greedy, but he was also stupid," Lorenzo said, pacing toward the floor-to-ceiling windows. The rain was letting up, the glittering lights of Lakeshore Drive reflecting in his cold eyes. He didn't have the brains to set up shell companies in the Caymans. He could barely spell fiduciary. Someone else orchestrated this. Someone with access to my inner circle, my personal accounts, and my routing numbers. Clara's mind raced, her brilliant, analytical brain snapping back into gear. She dropped to her knees, retrieving her briefcase from the Persian rug. She hauled her lush frame back up and pulled out her heavily modified MacBook Pro. "Let me look at the raw data again," she said, her voice dropping into the steady, methodical tone she used during boardroom presentations. She slammed the laptop onto his desk and plugged in the titanium flash drive. If Victor wasn't the architect, there has to be a secondary digital footprint, a backdoor in the syndicate's internal network. Lorenzo walked over and stood right behind her. He didn't hover, but his presence was a heavy, intoxicating weight. He rested one large hand on the curve of her thick waist, his thumb lazily stroking her soft hip. It was a deeply distressing, possessive gesture, but Clara forced her eyes to stay locked on the glowing screen. Lines of cut and banking mattresses reflected in her dark eyes. She bypassed the standard Swift network protocols, digging into the metadata of the encrypted wire transfers. The modern mob isn't like the days of Sam Giancana or Al Capone, Clara muttered, her fingers flying across the keys. It's not just cash in briefcases anymore. It's cryptocurrency, offshore hedge funds, and Swiss bank proxies. Look at this. She pointed a perfectly manicured, trembling finger at a string of IP addresses hidden beneath a dummy Finchen report. The transfer authorization didn't come from Victor's warehouse in Cicero, Clara said, her breath catching in her throat. She ran the IP through a reverse traceroute protocol. The progress bar inched forward, agonizingly slow. It was masked through a VPN server in Geneva, but the origin ping. Lorenzo, it came from inside this building, from the secure server room on the 40th floor. Lorenzo's hand tightened painfully on her hip. Only 3 people have biometric access to that server room. Me, my head of security, and Matteo, a smooth, cultured voice said from the shadows of the office doorway. Clara gasped, whirling around. Standing in the entrance was Matteo Moretti, Lorenzo's longtime consigliere. He was a sharply dressed, silver-haired man who had practically raised Lorenzo after the old Don passed away. He held a silenced Sig Sauer P226, and the barrel was pointed directly at Clara's chest. "Matteo," Lorenzo said, his voice dropping into a deadly, quiet register. He didn't reach for his weapon. He simply shifted his large body, stepping deliberately in front of Clara, shielding her generous frame entirely from the line of fire. "Tell me you didn't sell out your own blood to the New York families." Matteo let out a bitter, exhausted sigh. He stepped fully into the room, kicking the heavy oak door shut behind him. It clicked into the lock, trapping the 3 of them inside. "New York? No, Lorenzo. The Genovese family is a dying breed. They're dinosaurs," Matteo sneered, his eyes darting to the laptop screen. "I sold out to the Sinaloa cartel. They wanted the Chicago port routes. Victor was just my idiot pawn. He thought he was staging a coup. I was staging a corporate takeover." "You used Victor to order a hit on me," Lorenzo stated, his muscles coiling beneath his tailored suit. "You're too rigid, Lorenzo," Matteo spat, taking a step closer, the gun unwavering. "You refuse to traffic narcotics. You refuse to work with the cartels. You're trying to run this syndicate like a Fortune 500 company. There's no honor left, no loyalty. Just billions of dollars sitting on the table while you play legitimate businessman." Matteo's eyes shifted to Clara, narrowing with absolute malice. "And you fat, meddling sow. You were supposed to be a simple bookkeeper. I routed the cartel's payment through those shipping manifests, knowing Victor would take the fall if anyone noticed. But you had to play hero. You froze $3 million of cartel money. Do you have any idea what they do to people who steal their money?" Clara trembled, her heavy breasts rising and falling rapidly. But beneath the terror, a hot, bright spark of pure rage ignited. She was tired of men like Matteo, men who looked at her soft, lush body and saw only weakness. Men who underestimated her. "I didn't steal it, Matteo," Clara said, her voice ringing out, clear and sharp. She stepped slightly out from behind Lorenzo's broad back, refusing to cower. "I secured it. And right now, that $3 million is sitting in a Credit Suisse vault, encrypted with a 256-bit key that only exists in my head. If you shoot me, that money is gone forever, and the Sinaloa cartel will skin you alive." Matteo laughed, a cold, harsh sound. "I don't need the money anymore, Clara. I just need you both dead. Once Lorenzo is out of the way, the cartel will take the ports by force. I get my cut, and I retire to a villa in Monaco." He raised the gun, aiming right between Lorenzo's eyes. Time seemed to fracture, slowing down to a crawl. Clara saw Matteo's finger whiten on the trigger. She saw Lorenzo, unarmed and trapped, bracing for a bullet he couldn't dodge. Clara didn't think. She reacted with the primal, desperate instinct of a woman protecting the man she loved. She wasn't a delicate, fragile thing. She was a big woman, built with thick thighs, heavy hips, and real weight. Her left hand shot out, grabbing a massive, solid Baccarat crystal whiskey decanter that sat on the corner of Lorenzo's desk. With a feral scream, she hurled it directly at Matteo's face. The heavy crystal struck Matteo in the shoulder, shattering into 1,000 glittering shards and splashing amber scotch across his tailored suit. The impact knocked him off balance. The gun fired with a soft foot, the bullet grazing Lorenzo's arm and burying itself into the mahogany paneling behind them. Before Matteo could recover and realign his aim, Clara moved. She launched her entire weight forward. She slammed into Matteo like a freight train, her heavy, soft body pinning his slender frame against the glass of the office door. Matteo let out a breathless grunt as the wind was knocked out of him. Clara grabbed his wrist with both of her hands, slamming his arm against the wall. She used every ounce of her size, pressing her thick hips and heavy chest against him, crushing him against the heavy oak wood, refusing to let him raise the weapon. "Lorenzo!" she screamed, her voice tearing from her throat. Matteo snarled, thrashing wildly. He brought his knee up, catching Clara hard in the stomach. She gasped, pain exploding through her midsection, but she didn't let go. She twisted his wrist, her nails digging into his skin until he roared in pain. Suddenly, a massive hand wrapped around Matteo's throat. Lorenzo hauled Matteo off Clara with terrifying, brutal strength. He threw the older man across the room. Matteo crashed over a glass coffee table, shattering it into jagged pieces. The gun skittered across the Persian rug. Lorenzo was a blur of violence. He didn't bother reaching for his own weapon. He descended on Matteo, hauling him up by the lapels of his ruined suit. Lorenzo's fist connected with Matteo's jaw, a sickening crunch echoing through the penthouse. Matteo went limp, his eyes rolling back in his head, blood pouring from his nose. Lorenzo dropped the unconscious traitor to the floor. He stood there for a moment, his chest heaving, blood dripping from the graze on his bicep. The room fell into a heavy, ringing silence, broken only by Clara's ragged breathing. She stood by the door, clutching her stomach, her emerald coat torn, her dark hair a wild mess around her flushed face. Lorenzo turned to her. The look in his eyes wasn't just desire anymore. It was absolute, ravenous worship. He crossed the room in 3 massive strides. He didn't gently touch her face this time. He grabbed her by the hips, his large hands sinking into her soft, lush curves, and lifted her completely off the floor. Clara gasped as he slammed her back against the door, pinning her there with his hard body. "You tackled an armed man," Lorenzo breathed, his voice thick with adrenaline and awe. He buried his face in her neck, inhaling her scent deeply. "My beautiful, brilliant, reckless girl, you threw yourself in front of a bullet for me." I had momentum," Clara choked out, wrapping her arms around his broad shoulders, clinging to him as the adrenaline crash finally hit her. She began to shake. "Lorenzo, you're bleeding." "It's a scratch," he murmured, his lips trailing hot, wet kisses up her jawline. "You saved my life, Clara, twice in one night." He pulled back, framing her face with his large, blood-stained hands. He looked at her with a fierce, terrifying devotion. Do you understand what happens now? There is no going back to your apartment in Logan Square. There is no more auditing ledgers in the background. You belong by my side. You are going to run the financial empire of this family, and you are going to share my bed. I will burn Chicago to the ground before I ever let you go. Clara looked into those dark, merciless eyes. She felt the heavy, solid muscle of his body pressing against her lush, soft curves. She had walked into this room, a terrified accountant trying to stop a murder. She was leaving it as the queen of the Chicago syndicate. The money, Clara whispered, her lips parting as his thumb traced her lower lip. The cartel's $3 million. Keep it, Lorenzo growled, right before he finally captured her mouth with his. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was deep, bruising, and wholly possessive. He devoured her, his tongue sweeping into her mouth, tasting her breath, her fear, and her undeniable strength. Clara melted against him, letting out a soft moan as his hands roamed over her thick thighs, dragging her hips impossibly closer to his. She surrendered to the beautiful, terrifying monster she had saved, knowing she had finally found a man big enough and ruthless enough to hold all of her. Did Clara make the right choice by stepping out of the shadows and claiming her throne beside a mob boss, or is she playing a deadly game she can't win? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you loved this intense, twist-filled mafia romance and want more stories where smart, curvy women take charge, smash the like button, share this video with your fellow romance readers, and subscribe to the channel for more dark, thrilling tales.